Hi guys, welcome to part 4 of the video series of getting into hand reloading. For this video, I'm going to be discussing primers. First, I'll go through what a primer is, the basic parts of the primer, and then we'll go through the basic types of primers. In general, we have the powder on the inside, but we have to ignite that powder. So the most efficient way that we're igniting this powder is through the primer at the back. The primer is what the firing pin is coming into contact with to start off the sequence. So the first part of a primer we have is the cup. This basic part of the primer is what we see on the back of our cartridge here. Inside that cup, we have a blasting compound, or just a compound as I'll refer to it. There's a lot of different types. It used to start off with mercury, a type of mercury composition. Now there's a little bit of lead in there, and I think they mix salt and silicone or silica or whatever it is. This is just going to be a basic blasting compound, or a pressure sensitive compound. So any impact to this compound is going to create an explosion. On the bottom side of this, we have what is called the anvil. The anvil is basically just a little triangle or a star-shaped kind of thing that's inside the primer. So what initially happens is our primer sets inside of our cartridge like this. This is going to be our rim of the cartridge. We have the actual cup that the primer sets in. We have a flash hole here at the bottom, and the other side. Inside our cartridge here, we have our powder. Our powder isn't pressure sensitive. It's more of a explosive, fire sensitive material, unlike our priming compound here. What happens when we pull the trigger is our firing pin is going to impact our primer, which is going to dimple it right here. When that dimple happens, our anvil is stuck in between the outside cup of our primer and the cartridge itself. Not being able to move, the thing that's going to give leeway is going to be our priming compound in here. When that does happen, we're going to have a small explosion. A burst of flame is going to shoot down our flash hole here, and it's going to ignite our powder. And that, in a nutshell, is the basic function of a primer. Now, there's 4 basic types of primers. The 4 basic types of primers are small pistol primers, large pistol primers, large rifle primers, and then there was also small pistol primers. I do not have any at this moment. So let's look at these a little bit more in detail. Here we have the small pistol primer on the left and the large pistol primer on the right. Visually from a distance, we can't really tell the difference between these two. But if I take my caliper here and I put the caliper on the small pistol primer, see it comes in about 175 thousandths. Coming over to the large pistol primer, we come in at about 210 thousandths. Physically, their sizes are different. The small pistol primer is smaller. If we look at the insides of these, it might be hard to see. There's no real difference besides the size. We can see the anvil in there. It's a brass fixture. The priming compound, which is like a yellow substance on the inside of there. And then we have the actual cup around the outside of that. So what's with the sizes? Well, I can best illustrate this with 2 different types of cartridges or casings. On my left here, I have a 9mm, and on my right, I have a 45. Let's just say both of these cartridges or these cases hold the same amount of powder. With that, you can see the 45 has a large surface area on the inside, as opposed to the 9mm, which is a smaller surface area. In addition to that, we also have a little less bullet inset with the 45 as opposed to the 9mm. Therefore, there's more room in the 45 than there is the 9mm. You can physically see the difference in the size of those primers. What this boils down to, guys, is the larger the area inside of a cartridge, or the more amount of powder you have inside of the cartridge, the larger the primer you're going to require. Hence, in the case of the 9mm, which is smaller, and physically it'll even fit into the 45. This is why that we have that small primer on the back of the 9mm and the large on the back of the 45. There are some circumstances, in special circumstances, that you get into having a small pistol primer for a desired effect with the, say, 45, but in general, the smallest or the largest pistol cartridge you're going to go into is the 40 Smith & Wesson for the small pistol primers. Other than that, it's going to be a large. So that covers pistol primers. Let's look at rifle primers now. Being that I only have large rifle primers, let's take a look at this one. If you remember back to the large pistol primer, it came in at 210 thousandths. Putting my micrometer or my caliper here onto the large rifle primer, coming in at the same measurement of 210 thousandths. So aesthetically, this is the same size or the same features as the large pistol primer. On the inside, you can see we have our anvil, and then inside of that, we have our blasting compound and our cup on the outside. So there's no real difference. We can take a look at, say, the 30-06 cartridge here. Very long cartridge, and it holds a substantial amount of powder in it. Therefore, we're going to use a large primer. Now, on something, say, 223 or a 5.56 round, they're the same thing. You can see that we have a smaller casing here, and thusly smaller amount of powder. In addition to that, a lot of times with a 5.56 or 223, we can even compress that powder inside of the cartridge. Being that there's smaller room, you can see that we've opted for the small rifle primer. The same concept applies. The smaller the casing, the smaller the primer. The larger the casing, the larger the primer. Now there are some circumstances, and this is going to get into the final discussion that we're going to go into about primers. What if you have a larger casing with more powder in it, and you have to ignite that powder more efficiently? Well, then we can go over to the Magnum primers. Looking at the Magnum primer, just like all the other primers, we see that there's no real difference. We have the anvil, we have our priming compound in there, and then we have our outside cup. I can even take my micrometer and we come up with the same measurement as the large rifle primer as 210 thousandths. So aesthetically, the Magnum large rifle primer and the large rifle primer are the same thing. However, the compound on the inside of the Magnum is just that. When we think of Magnums, we think of something like 357 Magnum, where it's the same bullet, but it's a lot more powerful round. Same thing with 300 Winchester Magnum. It's a 30 caliber round. However, we have a lot more powder and a lot more velocity. In those circumstances where you require a larger blast or to be more efficient to ignite the powder inside the cartridge, we can resort to the Magnum loads. So that's all that really deals with. In this series of videos, I'm just going to be concerned with the 4 basic types. We won't dig into the Magnum primers. We discussed different parts of a primer: the cup, the priming compound, and the anvil. We discussed how it works. The impact of the firing pin crushes our priming compound in between the anvil and the outside of the cup, which sends an explosion into the powder, igniting it. We talked about the 4 basic types: the small and the large pistol primers, and the small and the large rifle primers. We also discussed a little bit about Magnum primers as well and the difference between them. Hope this video helped you guys out. Thanks for watching, guys.